me is 173 as we move through the tractate, come to a conclusion on this beautiful tractate, which is really one long tractate. All the Babas are really one long tractate. So the Gemara, we had said in our Mishnah, we'll start on top of 173a. Our Mishnah had said that if there's two Yosef and Shimon's in one town, that even though nobody can make a claim against them, there's two people named Yosef and Shimon in the city, even though nobody can make a claim against them because they could just say, listen, I'm not the guy who you're asking who want you the money. They can nevertheless make a claim against other people. Here pass Moshe Gemara. So they can make the claim against other people. And the reason is because there's a distinction between Nefila de Yachid and Nefila de Rabbim. Because we're not going to assume that the other Yosef and Shimon dropped it and this Yosef and Shimon picked it up. So the Gemara says, is that really the case? But what about the price that says, but there's a price that says that they also can't make a claim against other people if they have a document, because maybe they're not the ones. So how do we deal with the contradiction in our Mishnah, which says they can't make a claim even though they're not the only Yosef and Shimon? 173a Moshe, and the Brisa which says they can't. So the Gemara says, but Mike and so this takes us back to the dispute which we've had several times already. Whether or not you could just transfer the contract just by handing it over. And that's the dispute here. Tana Didan, the Tana of our Mishnah, Savar Osios Nichnas B'Mesira, that if it was just handed over, that's a way in which they now have it, and therefore they can make the claim. And so therefore, yeah, that's what we're saying. Yeah, they could prove it's not true. So therefore, whoever has a contract, presumably he was given it. So the Gemara says, Vitan. Yeah. Well, you'll see in a moment. He goes, Vitana Bara, and the Tana of the Bride says of the position, the fact that you have the contract doesn't mean it's yours, because it could be that the Rashbam says it could be just a picadon, it could just be a deposit with you. It's not an indication that it's yours. The fact that you have it doesn't mean it was handed over to you. It could be just a deposit. And so therefore I'll say it's not your contract. However, but if he obviously wrote to him, I'm giving you the permission to collect from this, then of course he could. So that's the way the Gemara says of dispute. Or alternatively, the Kuya Alma, everybody's at the position. Osios no, if he has the contract, presumption is he has it. Here is a different dispute, whether or not you need to bring a proof. If you have it in your possession, you need to bring a proof. Tanakamas of the position. That you don't need to bring a proof. And whereas the Tana of the Brisa says you need to bring a proof. The Gemara says, yeah, that you can just give over the contract and then it's given over. But Abai says you still have to bring a proof that it was given to you. Whereas Rava says, but Rava says, no, if you have it, the presumption is it was yours. So therefore, that's a dispute. Abai says, how do I prove to you? You still have to bring a proof. Titania, because we weren't in the Brisa. It says, there's brothers and they have an estate, and one of them has a note that's coming out from that he has. He still has to bring a proof. So my lav isn't the case that everybody has to bring a proof just like the brother. And so therefore you have to bring a proof. Whereas Rabba would say, no, Shani Achin, no, the brothers are different. He has to bring a proof because it's all big hefker belt there. Everybody's dealing with the brothers. He probably took it from his brothers. He has to bring a proof that it's his. The alternative version of this, Rabba could say to you, how do I know that you don't have to bring a proof? And there's one of the brothers who has a deed or note coming out from his possession. He has to bring a proof. The brothers, he has to bring a proof because they quickly could take it, they could slip it away. But other people don't have to bring a proof. Abaye says, no, it needs to give us the chiddush at the brothers. You might have thought, because they're always taking things from the estate. And therefore they're watching, and Imam is dar maybe the other brothers will be careful. He won't have to bring a proof. Kamash one, he has to bring a proof. So the Gemara says, but what about the fact that which we say in the Brisa, Kashem Shemotzian Hein Shtarchov Alcherim, Kach Motzian Zalzeh. Just like they can, our Mishnah says they can make a note against each other, but the Brisa says that just like they can make a claim against others, they can make a claim even against each other. But Ma'ika Miflagi. What's that dispute? Why does the Brisa say they can and the Mishnah say they can't? So there, it's because there they're arguing about the case whether or not the court will write a note for the borrower that the borrower owes money to the lender, even though the lender is not with him. Tana Didon Savar, the Tana of our Mishnah says that you can write a note that the borrower owes the lender money, even though the lender is not with him. Because therefore, since he says you can write that note, then what will happen is sometimes I'll go to the scribe and the witnesses, and I'll say, write for me this note, because I want to have a pre-approved mortgage, basically, to borrow the money, and I want to borrow the money, ben Shimon Chavrai. And after they'll write it, and they'll sign it in the Kitaway, I'll then use it for fraud, because there's another guy by the same name. Matana Barosa, but the time on the price says, you can't write the note for the borrower unless the lender is with him, so you don't have that problem. So now continuing with our explanation of the Mishnah. And if you find amongst the contracts a note that says Yosef ben Shimon is paid up, then both of their notes are going to be considered to be paid, and so therefore they don't owe. So basically, what does this mean here? Yeah. The Tana of our Mishnah says if one of them has a loan document against the other, it's not effective. But the Tana of the Brisa says it is. So it's a contradiction. Right, and that's why you can't collect it if one of them has a note against the person with the same name as him. Because maybe he went and he got the note written without the other guy there. They're explaining why there's a dispute between the Mishnah and the Brisa on that point. Yes. Yeah. Generally speaking, the Mishnah is considered to be more authoritative than the Brisa, because the Brisa means Tana Bara, the external source. It was not included in the canon. So generally speaking, all things being equal, the Mishnah will be more authoritative than the Brisa, but it's not always the case. You always have to go through the analysis. So the Gemara then says, if you find a document amongst the person's documents, it says Yosef and Shimon paid off his note, then both of them are considered to be paid off. You can't make a claim against either one. Taima de nimtza, that means to say only if it's found. You mean if it's not found, you can go and make a claim against them. But didn't we say in our Mishnah, didn't we say in our Mishnah that nobody's allowed to make a claim against them? The Gemara says, Tanan, so I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Mishulashin. Now we're talking about a case where they have two generations, so therefore they're not exactly the same document. And the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, so then let's look at the receipt and see who it reflects, which one of these people. So Abai explains, so Gemara says, the documents were written Mishulachim, meaning say you put down 3 generations there, so you know who it is, but the receipt didn't. So still, the receipt is enough to say you can't make a claim against them. Abai Amar Achakamar. Abai says, no, this is the way we read our Mishnah. Nimtza Lova ben Shtarosov, Shtaro Shal Yosef ben Shimon, Alai Parua, Shtaro Sheneim Peruan. So Abai says, this is what it means. If those 2 Yosef and Shimons are making a claim against one person, and this person says, and we find that the borrower says, we borrow from both of them, it says, this shtaro of Yosef and Shimon, I have paid it, then he doesn't know either one. You figured it out. Okay. So Yishaleshu, Tanem, Ayushneim, Kohanim, Yoktavu, Doros. And if both of them are Kohanim, you just add a 4th generation. Okay, so next Mishnah. Omer with no shtar bein shtarosai parua ve'eni yodea ezu shtaros kuan paruan. If he says to his son, one of my contracts amongst all my contracts was paid, meaning to say one of the notes I have against other people was already paid off, and we don't know which one of them, kuan paruan, you can't make a claim. Nimtzo echad shem, nimtzo echad sham shnayim. Well, let's say one guy there has 2 notes that he has a note against 2 people, 2 notes against one person, 2 notes against one person. Then I gadol parua, I cut it in a parua. Then we assume that he could collect the lower one, but not the top one, because at a minimum he could collect the lower note, because he has 2 notes against the guy, and only one of them was paid, so at least he could collect the amount in the lower note. Amar Rava shtar lecha biyadi parua. So Rava says, let's analyze this in the Gemara. Rava says that if a lender says to the borrower, your note is in my hands and it's paid, and he doesn't say which one was paid off, then agadol parua, katanena parua. Then he could collect from the smaller one, but not the larger one. Chobucha biyadi parua, but shtaros kulan paruan. But if the lender says to the borrower, a debt that you have in my hand is paid off, then we're going to say that all of them are paid off. He can't collect from any of them, because the expression of a chov, a debt, you could understand it to be referring to all the notes together, not just one note. So if that's the case, that there's a difference between shtar and chov, if that's the case, if the guy says sadai mechurocha, sada gedol mechurocha, it says one of my fields is sold to you, we say it's the larger field. Sada sheyeshli mechurocha, a field that I have is sold to you. Kol sados of mechurinlo. Would you say that all of his fields are sold him? Because as it states that as it says in the parsha that we saw in yesterday's parsha, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanim v'leiser Artsa Seir Sedei Adom, and the expression Sedei Adom doesn't mean one field; it refers to all the fields. So if he says Sadashi, maybe it means all my fields are sold to you. The person says no, there it's different. Awesome, Balashtar al Tachtona. There, with respect to the fields, the person who has the note on the field, he's got the lower note, and so therefore he has the lesser claim. Okay, so now we're up to the next Mishnah, which is very interesting. And we learn from this Mishnah that we see that they didn't really have the concept of a guarantor like we had today until the Talmud introduced it. Let's say somebody lends his money to his friend through a guarantor. You know what a guarantor is, Shia? So basically, you want to buy a house. You say, okay, show us your income. We're going to lend you $1 million to buy the house, but you don't have an income. How are you going to do it? So you get a guarantor. A guarantor is called an idiot with a pen, right? That's what they call the guarantor. Yeah. Well, they actually use not the word idiot. They use a Yiddish word, which I don't want to say. So the guarantor says, if he can't pay, I'll pay. That's the way we understand it. But the Gemara has different understandings of the word guarantor. So Malvas Chaver they are then you can't go and collect the money from the guarantor. We'll see what that means. The Mamarlo on top of 173b, but if he says the Mamanach Efra Minisha Eretza on the condition that I can collect from whoever I want, and the guarantor agrees from that, then he could collect from the guarantor. Again, we'll have to see what that means. Rashbag says, Rashbag says, if the borrower has his own assets, he can't collect from the guarantor. And this is a nice case. If a person says, I'm going to be the guarantor for a woman for the ksuba, meaning to say, the guy says, listen, if your husband can't pay the ksuba, I'll pay it. Then Vayabala Megarisha, and then the husband divorces her, and now this guy has to pay the ksuba. Yadirena, no. He doesn't have to pay until the husband says, I'm taking a vow that the woman can't get any benefit from me. When we're concerned, Shema Yasu Kanunya al Nachasim Shalzeh, the Achzir we're worried they're going to be in cahoots, and he'll divorce her. The guarantor will pay off the wife, and then he'll remarry her. So we stop that by saying he has to take a vow. Anyway, the Gemara says, the Mishnah said, if you lend your friend money through a guarantor, you can't collect from the guarantor. The Gemara understands at this point that the Mishnah is saying that if the borrower is in front of us and he has no assets, you still can't collect from the guarantor. And the guarantor only has to pay when the borrower died or ran away. So the Gemara says, my time out. Why can't you collect from the lender if the guarantor can pay? So Rabbi Rav Yosef Damri Travayo, Gavra Ashlimasle, Gavra Ashlimayulach, because the guy who borrowed the money, he's the one. He's the one. You gave it to Ruvain. I'm going to give you Ruvain. I don't have to pay. He's still here. So that's what he's saying. So obviously, it doesn't at all work with our notion of a guarantor. The guarantor is saying if he died or if he ran away. Like I said, obviously, it's not going to hold up. Like I said, it's not going to hold up. But this is their initial assumption. There are different ways of thinking about a guarantor. So Maskavor Rav Nachman, I dina de Parsai. This is a Persian law, meaning to say that the Gemara's assumption at this point is that the Persians rule like that the guarantor doesn't have to pay if the guy is there. You only have to pay if he's not there. No, you'll see, it is. The Gemara says, Adarabba, Basar Arba Asli. Gemara says just the opposite. The Persians are stricter. They go after the guarantor to collect his money, even if he's with us and he has money. They can go straight to the guarantor. The Persians have an even stricter approach. The Gemara says, Ella Beidina de Parsai. The Gemara says, no. This law that Rabbi and Rav Yosef said that he could put up the debtor even though the debtor has no money, that's like a Persian law. That they rule without any logic. Ella Amar Rav Nachman, what does it mean? My lo yipar min arev. It means lo yitba arev tchila. What does it mean you can't collect from the guarantor? It means that can be your first recourse. You can't go to the guarantor first. You have to first go to the guy to get the money if he has the money. And you can't go to the guarantor initially. But sometimes they would put in the contract like this: I could collect from whoever I want. Then you could go get from the guarantor initially. You have a great day, Harold. Mazel tov on the big program this morning. Amar Abuna minayin la'arev de mishtabed. So now we ask the question: how do we know? What's the source for the idea that the arev is responsible, even though there is he doesn't make the kinyan? The kinyan was made by the borrower. How do we know the arev is still responsible? So the Gemara's first initial assumption is it comes from the story of Judah. I'll be your guarantor. You can request it from me, which is itself a problem because Judah's not the guarantor there. He's the borrower. He's the one who borrows Benjamin to take him down to Egypt, and he says, I'll guarantee it. But the commentaries discuss that. But anyway, they say there really means like maybe Jacob gave Benjamin to all the brothers. So Maskefla Rav Chisda says, no, there's a different problem with this. This is not a guarantor. This is kablanos. Judah accepts upon himself, this is what's called an Arif Kablan. That we're not going to discuss now because it's really tomorrow's daf, but that's an even higher level of a regular guarantor, where he's even more advanced than a regular guarantor. So that can't be the source. So the Gemara says, and how do we know that Judah was at a higher level of a guarantor? Because it says, right, Reuben says to his father, meaning to say, give him to me and I will return it. And it's as though he accepted it using the word to na. That's an Arav Kabbalah that doesn't even require a kinyan. We'll see what that is in tomorrow's daf. So what's the source for a guarantor? The source comes from Proverbs chapter 20. Lakach Pigdo, take his garment, ki arev zar, because he's a guarantor. This other one is a guarantor. Ubaad nachriya chavleyu. Meaning to say, the pasuk is saying that we tell the lender to take the garment from the guarantor because he was the guarantor, because he said he will be the guarantor even without a kinyan. The Gemara says va'omer, and it states, B'ni imarabtu l'reyacha, if you were a guarantor to your friend, takata lazar kapecha, if you struck out your hand to a stranger, nokashta b'imrei ficha, or if you became basically nokadata b'imrei ficha, or if you stumbled or were snared by the words of your mouth. Meaning to say, if you became a guarantor for your friend, or you insulted your friend with words, then I'll give you an advice. Asazos efo b'ni v'hinatzel kivata b'kafreyecha lechis rapes urahavreyecha. So he said, if you came into the friend, if you messed up your friend, I'll tell you what to do, to grovel and to badger your friend. I mean, I'll give you the guarantee. If you're the guarantor, mamon yesh biyadcha, if you are the guarantor and you have money, then go atero pisas yad, open up your hand and give him the money. Vimlav arbeel avreim. And if you were not the guarantor, but you were just the person who said the wrong things, and send a lot of people there to make up. We see from here that that's the source for guarantors from Proverbs. Amar Amemar Arev Dimishtabed, the law that a guarantor, that he's responsible to pay the lender. This is a Machokas Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi the Amar Asmach Kanya Arev Mishtabed. So here they're questioning the very possibility of a guarantor being responsible, because according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that asmachta, remember, our future obligation, which you don't actually think is going to happen. So according to Rabbi Yossi, this is an asmachta, and so therefore it works. Even though the guarantor, when he signs it, he doesn't think he's going to have to pay. No, it's binding. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda, Damar asmachta l'kanya, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he says an asmachta is not binding, so therefore the guarantor is not responsible. But we see we rule like Rabbi Yehuda that asmachta is not binding, but yet the guarantor is responsible. So how do you deal with that? No, the guarantor, the reason why the guarantor is responsible, even though he doesn't make a kinyan, is because in exchange for the benefit that he has, that the lender believes him and relies upon him to loan out the money, then therefore the guarantor has made a kinyan with him, and that's how he's obligated himself. So there was a kinyan. Correct, yeah. He did a full kinyan at that point. You got an immediate consideration right there. And that's the benefit of the lender relying on him. So let's say if he says I'm loaning it out on the condition that I could pay, that I could collect from whoever I want, then he could collect from the guarantor. Shimon Gamliel says if the borrower has assets, then he always goes to the guarantor. And then he always goes to the borrower, not the guarantor. Amar Rabbi Chanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Shanu. This law that he says he could collect even straight from the guarantor, if he says that, When was that taught? Elash ein nechasam ulova. V'yesh nechasam ulova, lo yipar min arv. But if the borrower's asset, he can collect from the guarantor. And Mar says, "V'hamidik tani seil," but that's what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, "V'yesh nechasam ulova, lo yipar min arv." Because the Tanakama saver lo shner hachi, lo shner hachi. That proves that Tanakama says you could always go straight to the guarantor if you specify that. So Chisur Mechzor V'Achitani. So the Mishnah is missing some words, and this is how we have to read our Mishnah. If you lend the money through a guarantor, you cannot collect from the guarantor. But if you say on the condition that I could collect from whoever I want, then you could collect. When do we say that when the borrower has no assets? But if the borrower has assets, then you can't collect from the guarantor. The kablan, but if it would be a guarantor, it's called a kablan. Then you can go straight to the kablan. But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no. Even by a guarantor, that's called a kablan. You don't collect from the guarantor. You go straight to the borrower if the borrower has assets. That's going to be a dispute, which we'll pick up in tomorrow's daf as. We're ending Bava Basra with a bang. Not with a whimper, but with a bang, with some just tremendous sugyas. All right, we'll stop here. Yasher koach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.